Buggers with me, stand by. There we go. We are looking good. I'm going to swing around here. Live TV and a one-man show. How do you like it? Beautiful. Talk amongst yourselves, everyone. I'll get this sorted. Beauty, looks good to me. We are live. We are live on Facebook, we are live on Zoom, we are live on YouTube, and we are live here in the room here at the Oak Barrel for a special tasting for more reasons than one. Something we've been trying to do a couple of times, but never really lined it up. And when it lined up this time, we have something very, very special to taste. So, g'day to everyone. If you're watching here on the Zoom, here online, all around Australia, or indeed wherever you are in the world. My name is Scott Simons, and I'm standing in the bowels of the Oak Barrel here on Elizabeth Street in the Sydney CBD. I look after all the whiskey and spirits here, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you from wherever you are around the country to this tasting. A tasting that is well and truly sold out, that has quite a long waiting list. That unfortunately, if you're watching on one of the social medias and didn't get a ticket, I apologise. There's only so much I can bleed out of a bottle for everyone. But very, very quickly, for those of you who are in the room and haven't been here before, toilets are just up the back. There's water on the table. Feel free to stick your hand up at any point if you need more of either. I can help you with water, but you might look up the toilet by yourself. If you're at home, we are drinking some pretty hybrid booze tonight. So just like everyone who is in the room here is going to get an Uber or a public transport home, please get an Uber from your living room to your bedroom tonight. But this is a tasting that we have a very, very special guest, Ronan Currie from the GlenAllachie distillery. I think technically Asia's sales manager, but does a little bit of everything. And Ronan, I'm going to put you on the spot here before I let you introduce yourself too much further, but you've been in this room before.
Yeah.
Do you remember being here?
Yeah, I do actually. I don't remember a lot of my work trips when I travel around the world, but yeah, I remember being in the room. It was over a year ago now, I think. I was there. 2 years maybe.
Yeah, I think it was a year ago, just before Dramfest. I think it was probably on the way, and it was one of those times where we had so much going on, and Ronan's trip sort of fell into our lap that it just didn't line up. And the days he was free, we weren't free. And there's been one or two of your colleagues as well that's happened with, where it hasn't quite lined up. And for a brand that we've loved for a little while and featured at Whisky Fair and all that sort of thing, it seems a little bit silly that we haven't actually dedicated a tasting night to the GlenAllachie, which when we got a very, very small amount of the cast strength batches, we got even less of the single casks, so we couldn't do it with single casks earlier, a few months ago. We thought we were going to do it. We've only got one bottle open, so this is a very limited tasting, as you know, but it's good, mate, to finally get you into the room, not pouring booze admittedly. I've poured the booze tonight, but at least in the room on a, and I've seen you in the real life, and your head right now is actually bigger than real life, so.
I don't know, it's pretty big in real life anyway, so if it's bigger, I apologise.
First and foremost, thank you for tuning in from Glasgow. Now, we are in the middle of a cold snap here in Sydney, and I checked just before we went live. We are at exactly 14.9 degrees Celsius, and it feels like 14.6 with wind chill. So normally this is the point of the night where I make a joke about being in sunny Sydney and you're in cold, grey, cold Glasgow. But how's the weather over there at the moment?
We're going through our summer just now, so it'll probably last about a week. We're actually, I think 24, it's meant to get to 24 degrees today. It's been pretty strange because Scotland tends to get warmer when it is warm towards sort of 4 or 5 o'clock, but it's actually been sort of peaking at 1, 2. So thankfully the beer, especially in Glasgow, the beer gardens have reopened. So we've actually got something to do now. Scotland without booze can be a very dull place, and it's dull with booze sometimes.
Yeah, well, as far as I'm concerned, the world is collapsed. If it's warmer in Glasgow than it is in Sydney. Luckily, we have some whiskey to get us through this end times into the world sort of situation. But mate, do you want to do a quick introduction to your role? I mean, the GlenAllachie, as we know it in the modern era, is quite a young company, if not a young distillery. So maybe how you joined the company and what your role is there.
Yeah, so it is definitely a young company, but as you said, a young distillery as well in the grand scheme of things. I joined maybe 2 years ago now. Feels like a lot longer, but I think just over 2 years. I'm originally from Campbelltown, on the west coast of Scotland, so home to famous distilleries like Springbank, GlenDronach and Glenglassaugh. So I started working with Cadenheads, the independent bottler, William Cadenheads, Cadenheads, and then moved to Springbank, and then about 2018, 2019, decided to move to GlenAllachie. So the opportunity to work a distillery with the sort of backing of one of the industry's sort of best blenders, it was too good an opportunity to turn down. Not that I'm saying Springbank doesn't have good blenders there. It's not just cover myself there.
I mean, there are a few Springbank Cadenhead devotees in this room, not alone me. So you just be careful, just be careful on that one. But I can see a few people jumping on Facebook, and I'm going to be checking my phone as I go through. It's not purely because it's Sydney Fashion Week at the moment, and I'm checking my Instagram. I am going to be very rude and check for questions on the various chats, but there's also a mic in the room if anyone has a question at any point. But is there anyone in this room and indeed online who this is their first GlenAllachie experience? Yeah, I'd say close to 50% of the room here, and I'm going to virtually say this. My vocals keep coming in and out from a few people. Cool, I will fix that up in a second. I'll jump over, but do you want to give a quick background while I jump out of camera for a second, Ronan, on the GlenAllachie distillery as we know it today?
Yeah, sure. So GlenAllachie, as we know it today, as it sort of burst onto the scene from 2017 till now, it became an independent company, previously been owned by Pernod Ricard from the late 80s to 2017. It was bought over by Master Blender and Billy Walker in 2017. You probably will know Billy Walker from previous adventures such as BenRiach, Glenglassaugh, and most famously GlenDronach. I think they were purchased by Brown-Forman in around 2015, and then in 2017, GlenAllachie was acquired from Pernod Ricard by Billy. And we sort of set from there as an independent Scottish-owned distilling company to really establish a core range of GlenAllachie, a product that really can be identified from the distillery, which is something that's never really been created before. GlenAllachie pre-2017 was mostly used in some of our biggest blends, Royal Salutes, Chivas Regal. GlenAllachie was the sort of base malt distillate that was used in those blends. So we knew it was or Billy knew rather, that it was a good spirit, it had a good base to build from. Probably one of the easiest distilleries to purchase the inventory of stock to then go and make your mark in core range.
That's a really interesting concept, and I think I've fixed the audio issues, but please let me know if they're still going on. But when you buy a distillery that has a name, you expect, people know what they're going to expect. So, for example, when Billy did sell, particularly GlenDronach, not so much BenRiach and Glenglassaugh, but people know what GlenDronach's meant to taste like. It's sherry, it's big, it's rich, and that sort of thing. You can't come out and just release bourbon cask peated GlenDronach. That's not going to work. I reckon in my life, I tried 2 GlenAllachies as a single malt form, which was like a 30-year-old and then something a little bit younger. But I really had no idea what GlenAllachie was meant to be or what it actually tasted like. So What's it like, and you know, from what you've heard of Billy, in terms of walking into a distillery and having, you know, instead of building a new distillery, buying a distillery that has all this stock behind you that you can actually play with, and then crafting a flavour around that?
Yeah, I'm pretty similar in terms of, pardon me, trying GlenAllachie before. I think I'd only ever really tried a couple of GlenAllachies and from independent bottlers, and therefore you don't really know what the base character or the sort of house style would be, because the independent bottler would put their own twist on it. I guess purchasing a distillery that's got around 100,000 casks to come along with it, in no categorized style that whiskey fans or whiskey drinkers know or are fixated on. So it just gets you a great base level. The majority of GlenAllachie would have been bourbon, refill bourbon. So it gives you I was going to say neutral spirit, but obviously not a neutral spirit, but it gives you a good level playing field to then build from. So a lot of re-racking went on in the early months and years, and it's still going on today actually, of this spirit into different casks, because it's a thick spirit, and there's a lot of room to go and play with and change it. I mean, it's still very, very good in bourbon when you try it, but it's a very, very versatile spirit, which is what conglomerate blender like Pernod Ricard would have been looking for. A spirit that you can do everything with, but it's also great when you wanted to release it as a single malt, because it gives you so much room to play with.
Excellent. I think on that note, we should dive into whiskey number one, because it is probably the classic expression. I hold it up here. This is the GlenAllachie 12-year-old at 46%. I want a quick shout out as well to David and/or Caroline Taylor watching up in Launceston. Whisky is my jam, I think, is in Hobart as well. And to the people on the Zoom who've commented as well, I think I saw Paul there, and Reza, good to see you. The 12-year-old, I mean, this is often a lot of people's first experience. It's obviously the part of the core range. How do you talk about the 12-year-old in terms of the canon of GlenAllachie?
Well, the 12-year-old was the first core range bottling that was released by the company. There had never been, well, I think there was once a release from the previous owners of a bottling, an age statement bottling, single malt. This is sort of the first look at what GlenAllachie spirit, but GlenAllachie single malt is truly like. And you'll have seen, if you look through the years, what was released in 2017, 2018, 2019, up until now, you'll see a change in first and foremost, you'll see a change in the colour. But then when you go to taste, you'll see the progression of the spirit. The makeup of this whiskey is first fill bourbon, there's some sherry cask color also in PX, and there's a little bit of virgin oak in there as well. Now, as the releases in the years pass, they'll have spent longer in these second maturations, and then they're vatted together, blended together as a single malt, and reduced down to 46. We don't add colour, we don't chill filter, we don't get involved in any of that. We just let the influence of the casks speak for themselves. So for the 12-year-old, what you probably get across is that it is quite a thick spirit, juicy, and then you just get this influence, a little bit of spiciness and cinnamon in there from the virgin. Creaminess, as always, from the bourbon, a little bit of popcorn in there, and then just a lovely sherry PX and a little dry note in there from the Oloroso. But I think it's a great introduction to the distillery if you've never tasted it before. We would call this a session whiskey. Very easy to drink. You could open a bottle and then suddenly it's gone. You could easily share it with your friends. It's a lovely, lovely dram to get started on.
I love that every distillery, doesn't matter whether you're in Scotland, on Islay, on the mainland, in America, in Japan, in Australia, every distillery has a session whiskey, the one that all the distillery workers obviously knock back first. For me, this is a big session whiskey. Like there are other whiskies I will pour on my wheat bix before I pour this in my wheat bix. Yeah. This is more like on the brown sugar on porridge sort of, breakfast whiskey. But it's a bit, I'm saying a session whiskey, it's a very full-bodied whiskey. It's got a lot of flavour in there. It's not a meek
sort of weak whiskey. It's full of flavour. It can pack non-peated spirit, but it can really pack a punch of flavour. Yeah, a lot of sort of honey in there as well. It's very juicy, very thick, but full bodied.
Yeah. One of the things that I've noted from GlenAllachie from the start, and actually something that you sort of touched on, perhaps subconsciously there, is that, and we're going to get into a release that is, marketed and released by its cask, but the casks are not front and center of GlenAllachie when they're talking about whiskies, and particularly if we don't have the privilege of having someone from the distillery talking about it. If you go into a bar or a bottle store and you read the label, you're not really going to get PX and this sort of stuff. It's driven by flavor rather than the casks. I mean, what was sort of the thought process like behind that in terms of, because there's so many distilleries out there that will, if there's a hint of PX or if it passes an Oloroso warehouse, will be, labeled on the front there.
Well, our main focus is, Billy's main focus is using good quality casks for whatever we do. Again, it goes back to the sort of being an independent company and having that freedom to sort of do whatever we want. And in terms, so we have the ability to spend a little bit more on good quality wood and really focus on a really intense wood management system. When we go and release our core range, and as you said, we'll try one which focuses on the specific wood that was used. It is all about the flavour that's coming out, and obviously that flavour, majority of it will come from the different cask types that we're using, but it's all about the flavour in the bottle, really. And that's what we tend to focus on, the flavour in the bottle, but there is a really, really good, really intense wood management system that works behind that to ensure that the spirit that's going into the bottle is of the highest quality.
Yeah, 100%. That's I think it's a very purist way to talk about whiskey. I'm lucky enough to have been drinking whiskey for well over a decade. But there's some people I know, very good friends of mine, who have got into it in the past 5 years, and they get very surprised when a bottle of whiskey doesn't have the cask it was matured in front and center. But it's quite a new phenomenon to sort of yell and scream. But for those people who haven't tried a GlenAllachie before, this is their first impression. And again, anyone watching online, any sort of thoughts or nodded heads or shook heads about what this is? I mean, apart from the fact that we know that GlenAllachie is a quality spirit from certain accolades it may or may not have won, there's not a lot to sort of go on in terms of what to expect if this is your first impression. So anyone want to have a thought about what that was? I mean, for me, it's you definitely get that there's sherry influence in there, but I can still taste malt. It still tastes like whiskey, which I think is really important. Yeah.
Yeah, we were very much looking in all the releases that we do. We don't want the cask influence to completely overpower the characteristic of what the distillery gives you. The longer fermentation that Pernod Ricard implemented, and the type of distillation, the horizontal condensers that provide a slightly different process. We want the distillery, you'll be able to pick up certain aspects of the distillery throughout each dram, and you'll be able to compare them. But then as the wood changes, you start to see the versatility of that spirit, but there will be a similar character throughout. Yeah,
and that's a really interesting point as we might segue onto the 18-year-old is, Pernod Ricard. Before I jump, what time is it where you are at the moment, Ronan?
It's just after 10:15 in the morning.
Okay, so I can see you nosing that whiskey, but feel free to take a sip. I know we're 7:15, so we're well and truly in the mood. But that's all right. We don't judge here.
It's 10:15 in Scotland. I've already had a couple of drams.
Yeah.
I'm well ahead of anyone in that room. Don't worry.
Yep. I'm going to ask you a question. There's actually a question coming through from a friend of the Oak Barrel, friend of yours probably as well, Johnny Raff from down in Melbourne. There says a 12-year-old has changed in composition from the initial release. Is this more richer ex-sherry extended whiskey than the style we'll see from the 12-year-olds in the future, remembering that Australia tends to get everything about 18 months behind everyone else. So, is there a difference between the 12-year-old you're drinking at the moment, fresh off the stills, fresh out of the barrels, rather than what we're drinking?
Yeah, so there probably is a slight difference. I'm drinking the latest release of the 12-year-old, which I think came off the bottling line a couple of weeks ago. So what you tend to see, it's just because the second maturation, so it's been in refill bourbon and then it's been re-racked into first fill bourbon, come out of refill bourbon into first fill, so into sherry casks, Oloroso and PX, and then into virgin oak as well. So it's just the period of time that it's spent in those casks. When it was first released, and the release that you'll be tasting there, you're probably just getting a little bit more of the virgin oak and the first fill bourbon coming through, and the still essence of that refill bourbon. And as it spends longer and longer inside the PX and the Oloroso, these flavours will intensify and will dominate, but there'll still be the little introduction in the background of the virgin oak being in there, and the sort of creaminess you would, and the tannins and the vanillas that you would get from the bourbon cask.
Yeah. And it leads into a great segue, what I was going to talk about with the 18-year-old. Obviously, 18-year-old whiskey, when this was distilled, it was distilled by Pernod Ricard. The most immediate thing you can do when you come into a distillery is change the wood policy in terms of re-rack things into new barrels, change your suppliers, change that sort of stuff. Is there anything else you're doing now that you have done in the past 3 or 4 years in terms of production that changed from what under the new ownership?
Yeah, I mean, cask management is the biggest one, but we just slowed things down and made things real simple. We slowed most importantly, really, we slowed the fermentation time way down. It would have been around about 60, 70 mark, up to 110 would have been the sort of ballpark that Pernod Ricard would have been working in, which is fairly still quite a long time if you look at the industry average for a lot of big distilleries that are churning out spirit. It will be down at 50, 55 hours. So even that slight increase up to 110 is quite significant on the wash that you'll eventually distill. So we bumped up to 160 hours. So we moved the fermentation way above, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I've not heard of any other whiskey distillery in Scotland having such a long fermentation time. We're really trying to draw out as much fruitiness, floraliness as we can. So yeah, fermentation and slowing the process down. GlenAllachie went from a distillery that could produce around 4 million litres a year under Pernod Ricard. We dropped that down and did 500,000 last year.
Wow.
So the slowing the process down, the increasing the length of time that we use fermentation, and that provides us time to then look at the cask management. If your distillery is pumping 24/7, 7 days a week, you've not got a lot of time to then focus on cask management and the quality of the spirit that you're producing. So we slowed it down, went down to 5 days a week, I think 8 till 4, 7 till 4 shifts, and just slowed it all down and just focused on the quality and what we were trying to produce. We've also introduced some slightly other things, testing out some peated malt and trying all that. So having that, slowing the process down gives us a little bit more time to experiment on slightly different things.
Yeah, I like this is why I love working with distilleries like GlenAllachie here at the Oak Barrel, because I've definitely seen people yell up and dance and scream about, we took our fermentation time from 45 hours to 60 hours. Not naming any names of distilleries who might have had a 21-year-old that also dropped their ABV down about 6 or 7 years ago that ruined a very, very good whiskey. But for those who don't work in distilleries, going from 60 hours to 110 hours to 160 hours is the fruits and the florals you were talking about. Is that the main benefit apart from giving yourselves time to take longer tea breaks? Is that the biggest benefit you're going to get out of that longer fermentation?
Yeah, I would say that's what you're really looking for. It will give you a slightly higher ABV as well, but I think what you're really trying to produce, what we're trying to produce, is a really thick, fruity, floral spirit that will complement the casks that we eventually put it into. So it's trying to just knit the whole, sort of put the whole jigsaw together really, and it'd be really, really great having a really good cask management system and using, if people follow GlenAllachie, all these different wood types that we're using, specialist wineries to specialist bourbon and rye distilleries in America, that it'd be great having that. If you were going to fire it out at 55 hours and produce a very weak, I'll say weaker, trying to be diplomatic, a weaker spirit, that spirit would then just get lost when it goes into these lovely casks, and you would never get that continuation of distillery character. So we're quite lucky in the fact that Pernod Ricard did have a longer fermentation time with GlenAllachie, as it was the base spirit for their blends. So we're lucky in that aspect. But when we start getting into the stuff we've distilled, I think that's when you'll really see GlenAllachie really coming into its fore, because it'll be big, thick, juicy, and then you introduce the different casks that we're using as well, the quality of casks that we're using. It then just becomes what I think, and I would say this, but I think a whole new level of above what we're producing just now. And what we're producing just now is fabulous stuff.
Yeah. Excellent segue back onto something which you had absolutely no hand in distilling, the 18-year-old. And if we discuss the 12-year-old being this, bigger, robust sort of, but still sessionable whiskey, I wouldn't necessarily say like the flavors are perhaps a little bit more intense. But I wouldn't say necessarily it's bigger. It's more stately and more austere, like to my nose. It's got a real drag you in sort of element. I mean, it is 18 years old, so you'd expect that probably. But I don't know if anyone else in the audience is getting that sort of element. It's something that is, it's very, very rarely we go second with an 18-year-old whiskey at a tasting these days. 20 years ago, all the time, but not these days.
Yeah, again, I'm trying a slightly different batch of the 18-year-old. The newest batch, as you can see, the colour is slightly darker again. And again, that's just the influence, a longer influence from the PX and all the Rosso sherry casks that are used in there. The 18-year-old, from what I recall, the sort of the likely batch that you've got, or the likely bottling that you've got, I always found that it was slightly, compared to the 12-year-old especially, slightly spicier, a little bit more influence from the virgin oak, but a nice spice, sort of cinnamon and nutmeg in there as well from the sherry casks. I always found the 18-year-old had a little bit more of that herbally, I was going to say musty sort of note to it. Again, because of the age and because spending a long period of time in warehouses at GlenAllachie, it's just got a slightly older note to it, sort of a worn, sort of leathery note. I always found on the nose. And that just separates it from the likes of the 12, and we're not trying tonight, the 15-year-old. The 18-year-old has just got a little bit more wood influence, I found. A little bit more oakiness coming through.
Yeah, I think as soon as you said leather, I saw a few nods in the room going, yeah, definitely, I get that sort of leathery note. Is there, in terms of the batches of GlenAllachie, and it is, as we know it, in the year 2021, still quite a young, again, brand and company, if not distillery. Is there a way for the train spotters out there, and I'm going to pretend to ask for the people in the audience, but I'm really asking for myself here. Is there a way to decipher batches on the bottle? Are there bottle codes anywhere, or is that just a? Because I can't see one, to be honest.
There's not really a way to tell. There's a sort of bottling code. If you look at the back label down the bottom, or sort of down the bottom,
oh yep.
There's like a little sort of clear engraved sort of code, and that will roughly give you the date of when it was bottled. But I would tend to go, if you look at, for example, the 12-year-old or the 18-year-old that we first released, and if it's more of a classic whiskey sort of colour, that sort of golden sunset sort of barley colour, that will be an earlier bottling. And as we move on and get closer to 2021, you tend to see the bottlings, the variation, it just gets slightly darker and darker. And I can understand how that's a difficult one to gauge if you were looking at them all in front of each other. But Yeah, there's a code in the bottom. I've not got a bottle in front of me to tell you exactly what it says. I can't remember off the top of my head, so you could look at that and it might have like a year bottling on it or something. But
yeah, so but the secret is to open them and try them, and then basically you'll know. But I think I did see them. So we're actually on a 2019-18, and we've had a 2020 12-year-old, based on what I can see. And while we don't always get the brand new shiny things in Australia, first off, what we do get is the stuff that no one else has left in the world. Because I can't say there's probably too many 2019 batches of the 18-year-old left around the world.
that's a very positive way to look at it. You wouldn't get that sort of optimism in Scotland, but it's a very optimistic way to look at it.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's been plenty of time where we're the only ones in the world that have a bottling that everyone else in the world is looking for. Any thoughts on that one? Do we see the difference between? Does anyone like not agree with what I'm saying about the woodiness and the oak, but or rather like that leatheriness and that more subdued element when the 12 was a little bit bigger and not bouncier, just a little bit more maybe muscular. This has calmed down quite a bit, which. When we next do this might be completely irrelevant if the next 18 is full of vibrant sherry.
Well, the 18 again, as I mentioned previously, there's a continuation between the batch of 18 you'll be trying and the newest batch of 18, and it's still got that sort of, I find anyway, the sort of leatheriness and oakiness and woodiness to it. But I would often, and not in a bad way, but I would, comparing the 12 and the 18 together, I would describe the 12-year-old as just more youthful. It's a bit more brash, a bit more in your face with the flavours that it's got. Not in a young spirit sort of way, but just a bit more bold, big and bold. With the 18s, just a little bit more subdued, and you're getting more delicate flavours coming through.
Yeah. Also, and again, I love anything that has a core range where everything's released at 46% and above. I quite like that. But to, again, segue on that comment there about young and vibrant flavours, we might move on to number 3, because when we're putting this tasting together, every GlenAllachie we put on the shelf really sells out pretty instantly, and we didn't have the any single cask left, but we did have this release of 9-year-old rye finish, which I haven't actually tried yet because we only got a handful of bottles in, and this is the last one, so I can't sell you any. But I'm expecting this to be a little bit young and lively.
Yeah, it's a 9-year-old rye cask, part of our wood finish range, and it's a range that we tend to release 3 different wood types at one point, all from varying corners of the world. We released an 8-year-old Koval rye the year before, and then we released this 9-year-old rye. We haven't named the distillery on the bottle, but it comes from James Pepper Distillery, and they both produce rye and bourbon. But this is fully matured. It's finished in rye casks, but only rye casks. So it would have came from bourbon and then into American oak, Kentucky rye casks. It is a completely different beast from what we've just tasted, but the majority of what you would call a core range GlenAllachie. It is limited to around 2,000 cases worldwide, but it just shows the versatility of the flavour, the versatility of the natural spirit that GlenAllachie has, or the base spirit that GlenAllachie has, into rye casks. It's quite spicy, quite peppy. But again, you start to get that honey, treacly note to it as well, which is a continuation from the previous drams that we've tried. But this is completely different, and I would often describe it as sort of Marmite. People either love it or they really, really hate it. But I really, really like this because it's something completely different from everything else we do.
Yeah, it's I think probably from my flavour profile, the best compliment I can give this is that it still tastes like single malt Scotch whisky, and it still tastes like GlenAllachie, because they're, again, talking on that love of throwing casks into the ether and seeing what happens. We've seen a lot of rye finishes and rye things, which they tried to make it as spicy as possible, to justify putting the word rye cask on the barrel. And certainly they're spicy, but it's not a big oak spice. It's not a big tannin spice. It's a baking spice. It's sort of, cinnamon and nutmeg and that sort of thing is what I'm thinking about. I know I think reading on the back, or somewhere there, I think someone mentioned clove, and I'm not quite getting that, but maybe on the palate. But, how careful, and Jeff, I did see your question, I'll ask it in a second. How you've spoken a lot about wood policy and wood management and being very careful about that and slowing things down to ensure that you can do that properly. How hard is it in 2020 and 2021, even before we put a global pandemic into the mix in terms of sourcing casks, all of a sudden things, the whole shipping trades have sort of slowed down as well. How hard is it to put A+, premium wood policy in? Like, do you have to really spend time sourcing your suppliers, and what's the difficulties there?
Well, we went through a thing in the UK called Brexit, so it got pretty hard for a time to source casks and bring them in.
No, mate, we forgot about Brexit. We've got bigger things to deal with now. That was your fault. That didn't have anything to do with us.
So it was quite hard to get casks from the European Union at that point in time, I guess. But it says Billy's been working with the same sherry supplier for years and years, and through his vast time in the industry, around 50 years now, and just knowing who to speak to get good quality casks, and trusting people that he's worked with for many years. We've got a wood policy that I've never came about before. The amount of wood that we're bringing in from around the globe, whether it be America, the Caribbean, or Europe, is unbelievable. The sort of stuff. We've got mountains of casks sitting waiting to be filled at the distillery. We are not producing spirit quick enough to get it filled into these casks. It's a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of knowledge as well. It's probably one of those things that I wouldn't be able to explain to you how when it's good, when it's bad. It's just knowledge within the industry. It's just experience that Billy is able to tell. Probably comes from drinking a lot of whiskey as well, trying a lot of bad casks. To know how good a good cask is, you've got to experience the bad casks, I suppose. But yeah, it's a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of money as well. It's getting more and more expensive, as you said. Transport is getting more and more expensive, but as more and more distilleries are more independent distilleries are focusing on good quality wood, and I guess exploiting that area of the market where the bigger distilleries and the bigger companies have sort of lost focus of. We've really positioned ourselves in there that we really want to focus on good quality management and producing the best spirit. As I said, time, effort, and then put that money into it as well, I guess.
It is leads me to an interesting question. I've stood in this room many times and presented whiskey in front of people and mentioned the word Billy and Walker, or the name Billy Walker. Is someone that people may have not be overly familiar with. He sort of bought BenRiach and then bought GlenDronach Distillery and then bought Glenglassaugh under the BenRiach Distilling Company umbrella, essentially. And essentially all those three distilleries brought them to the fore where they are today. Sold that as bought GlenAllachie, which he's in the process of doing. Outside of just that enigma who seems to have the Midas touch of, turning things, what's it like to work for someone like that? And knowing full well, if you haven't come from a Pernod Ricard or a Diageo background, you've come from a Campbelltown background, which arguably is the most careful and slow-moving whiskey region in Scotland. What's it like working there?
It's a strange one. Springbank, I think, the whole company in general, I think, would have had about 85 to 90 employees, and it was very slow moving, and that was it. That was fine. That was the way it was. With GlenAllachie, it's actually very, very similar. It's a lot less employees just now, but we're around 23, 24, 25 employees at the distillery and within the offices and stuff. It can be hectic, chaotic, but it's the enjoyment that you get from working for a small company. As I said, you do many different jobs. We don't have brand ambassadors or anything like that. I do sales, but I also do a lot of tastings and brand ambassador work, and it's the enjoyable thing about working for a small company. We taste everything that is bottled. I have friends in the whisky industry who work for bigger companies who will be selling things that they've never tasted before. We taste every single thing that's about to be released. We openly give our opinions on it and whether we like it, whether we don't like it. But yeah, it's the enjoyment of working for a small company is, and one that's growing and doing so well, both in sort of reputation wise. Yeah, it's fantastic. Billy can be a bit of a nightmare to work for sometimes, but that's it. That's the fun of it all.
Sometimes you got to put up with the nightmares for genius. I understand. A quick question coming here from Jeff on the Facebook. And it's probably not as relevant to this, but he says, is GlenAllachie using older juice in their core range releases to stick to a flavour profile? Presumably on this, you've called it a 9-year-old because that's exactly how old this one-off cast finish release was. But for the 12, the 18, and what we're about to get onto in the 10 cast strength, are you stuck on, if you have a flavour profile in mind that you'll climb up to, or is it going to evolve as 12 and 18 and various casts evolve themselves?
So, not chill filtering and not adding any colour, you do leave yourself open to slight cask uniqueness and cask variations. We're not taking away all the oils, all the fats, all the esters, the tannins. We're not taking away any of that, and we're not adding in that caramel colouring. So when we put a vatting together, relatively small for the 9-year-old, for example, the 9-year-old rye, only 2,000 cases. It's not a lot of bottles of whiskey, and therefore it's not a lot of casks that go into it. So you will, if we were to do another 9-year-old rye or another one, or what we do for the 12-year-old and the 18-year-old, for example, such small bottlings that you will see this variation. In terms of pulling stock down, it's probably something that we don't do just now. We don't really have a need to. We've got plenty of stock of these vintages. It's not, you're maybe talking 1 year if the most, and it's something. I know it was sort of quite known, maybe at GlenDronach, that they were pulling things from 2-3 years down, but it's not something we've had to do just yet. Yeah, the age on the bottle is the youngest whiskey in there, but it will be, for example, the 9-year-old rye, it will be 9-year-old, if anything, just 10-year-old. But that'll all depend on filling dates and when it turned 10 and everything like that. So it's not something we need to do now, but I don't really think it'll be anything that we need to do in the future. The stocks looking into the future are fairly full.
I love, and obviously people in this room and people who've come to Oak Barrel tastings virtually before, we've done a lot of tasting with very small distilleries, whether they be from Scotland or other parts of the world, where there is like a real demand for just an impatience waiting for stock to mature because there is so little stock this distillery has produced. With GlenAllachie, one of the best things is it has been making a lot of whiskey historically. So there is enough to go around, so you can experiment and have a 12-year-old that is truly 12 years old and 18 that is truly 12 years old, because the stock exists and there's not many distilleries on the market, and certainly new distilleries and new brands coming in that have that ability. So I think that's quite a fascinating thing that is unique to GlenAllachie in the market at the moment.
Yeah, as you said, it is the benefit of essentially you essentially have a new brand, not a new distillery, but you have a new single malt whiskey, and you've got plenty of stock behind you. So yeah, we don't need to drag anything down, or not drag anything down, but pull the age down, or we don't need to do non-age statements and anything like that. We're not like new distilleries, usually in Scotland. I don't know about in Australia, but for distilleries that are built in Scotland and they're new, they're brand new, they usually start producing gin or something just to get out the door and get a sort of cash flow in. But all their time is just focused on good cash management and releasing stuff that we think is the best it can be, and hoping people like it. Again, we're not hampered by being involved in a big company or anything, so we're not just trying to churn out any old tat or young tat to get money in. we're just enjoying ourselves and looking at the special whiskey that comes out the wood.
That's the gin and white spirits thing is not unique to Scotland in terms of new distilleries.
No.
It reminds me of, we recently did a tasting with Boutique Whiskey Company with Dave Worthington, who you're probably familiar with, and with the Australia series. And there's one distillery, Blackgate, who had a batch there of about 400 bottles, their first batch, and it emerged to be 3% of their annual output was in those 400 bottles that was released, which I think blew a few minds over in the UK, but we're very used to it in Australia being very small batches. And you need to release a gin because you've got no whiskey. 100%. We might move on, and I didn't really know how we were going to do this, but I think for anyone playing at home and anyone in the room, and as long as you don't mix them up, remember which is your left hand and right hand, the 10-year-old cask strength batch 3 and 10-year-old cask strength batch 4 might be good to nose together, and then we can go and taste together. So, because this is a pretty special whiskey. You said before I have that optimist sort of element to it. Probably, one of the last unopened batches of GlenAllachie 10-year-old batch 4 in the world by the time it got to us. At the Oak Barrel, we don't really get too hung up on awards and that sort of thing. There are so many out there, and you can sort of apply to the Western Sydney whiskey competition and make sure you get double gold in something. But for us, the one that we've always really respected is the World Whiskies Awards. And of course, batch 4, which is the 5th whiskey tonight, has picked up Best Single Malt in the awards in 2021. I've spoken to other distilleries that have won it in the past. In terms of winning the award, and we'll talk about the whiskies themselves in a sec, which is obviously the most important thing. Is it just like a tsunami flooding the offices as soon as you win and the phone doesn't stop ringing and people in Australia go, "I'll take a pallet, please"?
It was like that. We've always thought when we've released new 10-year-old cask strength that the one we're releasing is the best. That maybe comes across very sales orientated, but in general sort of flavour. If you were to try batch 2 and then try batch 3, you would say, "Oh yeah, batch 3 is the best 10-year-old there is," and then you try batch 4. But because it is batch releases, and there was less batch 4 than there was batch 3, the batch 3 we released with 3,500 cases. Batch 4 was below 3,000. So by the time batch 4 won the World of Whiskies Best Single Malt in the world, it was already gone. It was already sold. It was, and we were creating batch 5 at that point, and close to releasing batch 5, and we were sitting going, if batch 4's won this, and this is the craze around batch 4, wait till you taste batch 5, because as I said, every time we've made a new batch, we've thought, oh god, this is a lot better than the previous batch. But yeah, it was really hectic, and it was good, and it's a real sort of recognition of what not only what Billy's doing, I guess, and he would probably say similar, but I wouldn't want to speak for him, but it's a real recognition of what the whole team has done, from the cask management in the warehouse all the way through to marketing, to sales, but not to give us too much credit. We've got the easiest job. I guess it's a real recognition of what we've achieved at the distillery in such a short period of time. Yeah,
100%. So let's put aside awards for a second and what other people have said about the whiskey we're about to try. I'm sure people at home are already trying it if they haven't tried it already, because I have no control over them. But I remember when I first tried the GlenAllachie core range releases, it was the day before Whiskey Fair, about 2008, 17 or 18, and Shane Silver, who is my representative for GlenAllachie in Sydney, and they arrived about 3 days before the fair. So we were already setting things up, and I'd said, we need GlenAllachie there. Can we air freight them over? So we air freighted a case of each over to debut it in Australia before the stock was arriving in a month or two's time by sea freight. And I'm like setting up tables and answering phone calls, and we're doing this tasting in between all of that. And we had, I think it was the 12, the 15, the 18, there wasn't a 20, 25 or anything then, but we had the 10 batch 1 cask strength. And it just, for me, summed up what GlenAllachie, like the spirit was, not knowing really what it was going to, but in that run of 4, it's went, that's it. That is what it is in its purest form. So from your point of view and the distillery's point of view, when you go to create a batch, whether that be batch 1 or batch 5 or batch 6 in the future, what is there a template, or what is a cask strength 10-year-old batch meant to be from your point of view?
Well, from my point of view, you want a batch release. Let's speak about batch 3. You want it to have some relation to the 12-year-old, the 15-year-old, the 18-year-old, even the 25-year-old. You want it to be, oh yeah, that's a GlenAllachie spirit in there. I really want you do want to. I always find with cask strength whiskey, sometimes the actual fact is cask strength is so much of a selling point that all you're tasting is spirit, and you're not getting a lot of the other flavour. The cask strength whiskies I enjoy the most are ones that you can go, yeah, there's a little bit of spirit note in there, the spirit note that people enjoy in there. You can tell it's cask strength, but the fact is cask strength isn't dominating the whiskey. The batch 3 is actually slightly different. It's first and second fill bourbon, PX and Oloroso, split between puncheons and hogsheads, and then virgin oak in there as well. So you see from the cask types I spoke of, the 12 and 50, the 12 and the 18, sorry, and this 10-year-old, they are quite similar. Slightly more bourbon in the batch 3, 10-year-old, but being 58.2%, it's got that spirit flavour in there that you're looking for. Allows you to add water if you need it, or if you're trying batch 3 for the first time, I would strongly recommend adding water for your second or for your third taste, just to see how the water opens up all the oils and the esters in there and can create a completely different whiskey for you. But yeah, I think the batch 3 is one of the best whiskies we've done. I mean, it's truly a great dram, but it doesn't come across at 58.2, which is fairly high.
Yeah. Obviously, you can see me on the live stream doing the very responsibly two-fisted whiskey tasting. No, I think you're responsible here. There's actually a lot of people in the room doing it as well. They're different whiskies. I mean, they're cut from the same cloth, but they are different whiskies. Like, I find the 3 to be a little bit drier. Maybe you've put that bourbon suggestion in my head, and it's got a little bit more of that vanilla and that sort of element to it, where the 4 is a little bit rounder. That's good, yeah.
You can even just see slightly from the colour, the batch 3, it's just slightly lighter. It might not be the best in the...
yeah, you can see that.
But the batch 4, you can tell it's just a slightly bit richer, more, I would say more sort of like sort of mahogany, sort of that darker sort of colour. And that just comes from the batch 4's got no first and second fill bourbon in there. It's PX, Oloroso, virgin oak, and yeah, it's again, there's a continuation of what we've done through the core range and from previous batches, but it's slightly longer maturing in the casks, slightly different percentages of what we've put in the vatting. Batch 3, we're saying it's slightly bit drier, slightly a bit creamier. You're getting Oloroso hogshead. I'm jumping about a bit, but in batch 3, it's got Oloroso hogsheads. So smaller casks, a lot more wood contact. So that flavour profile that you get from Oloroso is sort of injected more into the spirit. So you will then start getting a little bit more of the dry sherry notes in batch 3, I find, that you get from Oloroso's, Oloroso type whiskies. So that's where the sort of dryness, creaminess, more sort of bourbon flavours then come through as well. Where batch 4 is more sweeter, more, I'd say PX dominated, with a slight sort of spiciness in there from the virgin oak.
Yeah. I don't know if you realised it then, but when you held 2 whiskies up to the screen, you officially applied for a visa to Australia. That's the criteria.
Yeah, I'd do anything to get rid of a British passport just now.
A few comments coming through. I want to say g'day to Phil Brooks on the Facebook. Can't believe my bottle of these. I have batch 1 and 2 in my cellar. Was hoping to make a vertical. Yes. There are a very limited number of batch 3s available. I don't have any batch 4, obviously, to sell, but I do have a small amount of batch 3s to go. But I want to throw to this, and while people are sort of sitting on this and maybe doing the side by side, Batch 5 is out. Is that out in the UK now, or is that still being developed?
Batch 5 is out, yeah. It's out around the world. Everywhere apart from Australia, I believe.
We'll get there. And then when everyone's chasing Batch 5, we'll be the only ones that have it. So, and we're not giving it back. Any thoughts? There's a bit of conversation in the room. I don't know if you can hear the very low effects mic, but that's good. We encourage that. Batch 3, Batch 4. I'm a little bit torn, to be quite honest. I'm not sure I can pick a winner. I have to say, I really there's a 4 up the back there. Yep. 3. Yeah, there's a 3. Someone's gone 1. I think was that 1? Batch 1. I quite liked Batch 1 as well. Yeah, that was a good one. I'm finding this very, very hard. I haven't added any water. I think in their natural forms, I probably lean to 3.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I add a drop of water, and sorry, John, I'm just going to steal a pipette here and take, because I feel like 4's hiding a little bit for me. It's a bit shy at the moment. It's got something to show me that I haven't quite figured out yet. But that's one of the greatest things about whiskey. And yes, we are able to open the world's best single malt as a judged by a competition, which we don't put too much into, but we think if there's any competition that, as far as the oak barrel is concerned, the World Whiskies Awards is the one to really take, put a bit of credence into. But at the end of the day, no one should go chasing that. You should open bottles of whiskey and drink what you like and decide for yourself what great whiskies are. Thankfully, with a brand like the GlenAllachie, I haven't had a bad one yet. And I remember I was actually a customer at the Oak Barrel many years ago, and I volunteered to work at the fair. It would have been 2013 or 2014 fair. And on my table, there was a VIP dram that you could put, underneath the table and then deal out special. 30-year-old GlenAllachie by Great Malts of Scotland, I think.
Right. Yeah.
Poured like Coke. And that was my introduction to GlenAllachie. I've never seen another bottle again. It went for about $300, which back then I said, that's way too expensive for whiskey. That's insane. But I would have bought a case now if you could still get it for that price. But there was for a long time the only GlenAllachie I'd ever tried, which when the core range went out, I knew Billy was behind it and some great people working there. Okay, that's going to be a hard, ruler to stand up to. And yet even from the 12, I thought they were exceptional. So, these cask strengths are awesome, and I will spend a little while, I think, determining what my pick is. But it doesn't necessarily need to be a pick and a favourite, because that's what the GlenAllachie range is. And from the past few years, we've seen more and more experimentation with the wood series and single casks and that sort of thing. So I think it's a credit to not only Billy, because he gets to take the credit, but the whole team there at GlenAllachie. Yeah,
as I said, we often think that every next batch is the best one. But the batch 4, as I said, winning the award is a real credit to the people that are putting in the hard yards behind the scenes that maybe don't get the recognition that they do. It's very easy for me to sit here and wax lyrical about a distillery and how good it is, and for people to enjoy it and go, yeah, that's brilliant. But there's some really hardworking people behind the scenes and that are putting these whiskies together, or doing the re-racking and getting them into the casks that allow Billy to produce the spirit that he's producing, and then allowing us to go out there and sell it and represent the brand. The cask strengths are always a good indication about the way GlenAllachie is moving, I guess. If you looked at batch 1 to batch 4 just now, you'll see a clear indication of the way it's moved. But yeah, we're still maintaining that core characteristic throughout everything we do. But to effective wood management, they're all slightly different in their own unique way. But yeah, I tend to agree with you with the 10-year-old cask strength. Batch 4 is the best in the world from World Whiskies Awards. I prefer batch 3, but then I prefer batch 5, and then I'll probably prefer batch 6 and 7 in the long run anyway. So it's all opinions, it's all subjective.
And that's the beauty of whiskey. And I know we've got you We asked for an hour and we've gone over that, but I'll keep you for another couple of minutes if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you've spoken a lot about the future tonight, and that's very exciting. Not just with releases that you have in terms of batch 5 of this and batch 6, which you're working on, and then the various bottlings of the core range. But can we expect more wood finish expressions, more single casts? Like, when we're sitting here in a year's time, what are we likely, and then in 5-10 years' time, where do you think GlenAllachie is sitting then?
There definitely will be future wood finishes, and we've just recently released, and it's, I'll say, on its way to Australia, the wine finishes, which is sort of just a branch off of wood finishes, as it would suggest, but we're focused on different wines from different parts of Europe. Fairly easy to understand that one. But yes, I think we'll always maintain our same sort of focus on good quality casks, and being able to experiment will allow us to and give us the best opportunity to release good spirit or unique, interesting wood finishes, wine finishes. I think we did a virgin oak series where it was French, Spanish, and chinkapin, which is a sort of Native American oak. It's not commonly used within the whiskey industry or any sort of spirits industry, but the ability to get these casks in and just see what things are like, and how the terroir of where the trees are growing and where they fell and the oak and stuff, it creates something really, really interesting. And I think that's only something that we're going to try and expand on. We're not trying to be big, bold, and brass about it. We're doing things that we just want to produce good spirit from, and if that introduces people to a different line of spirit that they've maybe not tried before, then that's great. But yeah, we're just trying to show people how different casks work and how they can produce good spirit off of one exceptional good use spirit.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's a very exciting future for the GlenAllachie distillery, and hopefully this is not the first time we can get together. I want a quick shout out to Johnny Raff again, who says might be able to help you with a vertical 10-year-old tasting if he ever gets out of Vic, Scotty. Well, that's great, Johnny, but I think you've just invited 50 people to that vertical tasting, and so his number there is 0408. No, but that'll be a lot of fun if we can do that in the future. But Ronan, I know that it's terrible weather over there. It's bright and sunny, and I know you'd much rather be in cold, miserable Sydney right now. But I won't keep you from the beer gardens any longer. We might say farewell to our friends on Facebook and YouTube. But for those of you at home, we can't hear you, but we can hear the people in the room. So if we could give a big round of applause, please. See, I told you weren't just talking to me all night. There are actually people in the room as well. It's amazing. As soon as we're doing these hybrid tastings, they're so polite. They were never this polite when it was just me hosting tastings.
I'm not this polite in real life, I'll tell you that much as well. Online, Zoom, sort of StreamYard tastings and stuff, they're really, really different, but I don't think anything will compare to the enjoyment of doing a tasting in person and the sort of relationship that you can build with enthusiasts of whiskey. So I just thanks everyone for coming along and also tuning in at home. And I hope you enjoyed the whiskies. That's the most important thing.
100%. Obviously, the people here have come from far and wide in Sydney, but a quick shout out to Dave Robson, who's been watching in from Perth, WA. And we sent packs of these all over the country. So while there is no substitute for being in person, having a chat, we've never been able to connect around the country and around the world like we have. So it's been great. So thank you very much again for a beautiful morning in Glasgow. And to our friends on Facebook and YouTube, I will see you at the next one. I'm going to run around the corner into the producer's booth and kill you. So Ronan, for the next 10 seconds while I do that, the floor's all yours.
Okay. Yeah, just thanks for everyone for coming along. I hope you enjoyed the whiskies, and just keep an eye out for future ones that should be making their way down to you very, very shortly.